What happens to the child who grows up raising the adults? No one warns you that some children grow old before they grow up, not in body but in spirit. And those children, maybe you were one, don't get to be loud or messy or free. They become something else, something quieter, something useful. You were the one who noticed things no one else did. You read tension like it was printed in bold. You heard the silence after the slammed door louder than the door itself. You learned to manage moods the way other kids managed toys. Before your hands were big enough to reach a light switch, you were already carrying a lantern. Not for yourself, but to light the way for others. That's not childhood. That's emotional labor. And here's what makes it dangerous. People loved you for it. They called you wise, called you thoughtful, called you an old soul as if it were a blessing, but never stopped to ask what that soul had seen. Carl Jung once described intuitive introverts as those who perceive the inner world of others with almost mystical clarity. He said they live a difficult life because what they sense, others overlook. You weren't just empathic. You were tuned in like an antenna no one built, but everyone used. And you used it too, because you had to. You became the calm in the room, not because you were born serene, but because someone had to be, and it couldn't be them. You smiled when things were breaking. You comforted when you needed comfort. You shrank so others wouldn't explode, and the more you disappeared, the more people praised how easy you were to love. That's the tragedy. You weren't loved for being whole. You were loved for being helpful, not maliciously, but invisibly. You were the child who dimmed your own fear just to keep someone else's anger from tipping over. And in that dimming, you lost something. That lantern you carried wasn't a symbol of inner wisdom, not yet. It was a sign you were doing something no child should have to do. Illuminating darkness you didn't create, but you did it. You survived. You read the room. You steadied the ship, and you got older. But that survival came at a cost. A silence inside you that still waits to be heard. So if you've ever felt ancient in a room full of people your age, if you've ever felt invisible in the very moment someone said you're so strong, then know this. You were never broken. You were just early. And this story, this is the one where you stop carrying that lantern for everyone else and start lighting the way back to yourself. They called you an old soul. You nodded. You even felt proud. But you were too young to know that old soul often just means you were robbed of your childhood, and you were polite enough not to scream about it. You listened more than you spoke. You helped more than you played. You understood things children shouldn't have to decode. You became emotionally intelligent, not from books or role models, but from walking barefoot across the shards of adult dysfunction. Psychologists call it parentification. It's not about chores, it's about roles. When a child becomes the parent emotionally because no one else is steering the ship, you were that child. You brought calm when there should have been comfort. You cleaned up emotional messes you didn't make. You translated moods, carried burdens, diffused chaos. And you learned quietly, deeply, and without question that being needed felt a lot like being loved. But it wasn't love, it was dependency, it was survival with a halo. There's a story by Ursula K. Le Guin called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. It tells of a utopian city whose happiness relies on the suffering of one child locked in a dark room. Everyone in the city knows. Some accept it, some leave, but most go on pretending it's fine. You were that child in the room. Your brightness paid for someone else's peace. Your silence kept the smiles alive. Your adaptability made it easy for everyone to ignore the cost. But you remember the night you made your parent laugh so they wouldn't cry. You remember the mornings you made your own breakfast, called it independent, then went to school like nothing was missing. You remember becoming the solution before you knew how to ask a question. And here's the cruel twist. People admired you for it. They didn't see your emptiness, they saw your efficiency. They didn't see your longing, they saw your loyalty. They didn't ask how you became so wise, because wisdom in a child is often a scar disguised as grace. Jung said that what we repress becomes our shadow, And when that shadow grows in silence, it takes with it our ability to know what we really need. You forgot how to be cared for. You became the helper, the advisor, the healer, but you never got healed. You moved through the world like a gifted ghost, present, perceptive, and slightly out of reach. Not because you wanted to be alone, but because letting people close felt like a risk you couldn't explain. And now? Now you walk through life with a smile that still remembers the weight behind it. You offer insight, compassion, intuition, but struggle to receive it in return, because somewhere along the way you internalized a truth that was never true, that you are only lovable when you're giving something away. But you are not a utility, you are not a support beam, you are a human being with a heart that's carried more than it should have, and it's time someone carried you. Even if that someone is you, if this was you, if you were the one holding it all together while no one saw, say so. Say, that was me, because you are not alone, and because from this moment forward, you don't have to earn your place in the light by staying quiet in the dark. You became the strong one, the steady one, the healer. And in all that strength, no one ever asked what it was covering. There's a kind of grief that comes not from loss, but from suppression, from never being allowed to break, from becoming the person everyone leaned on until you forgot how to lean on anyone yourself. Carl Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. But what happens when your darkness was never allowed to speak? What happens when your pain had to be productive to be permitted? You were applauded for your emotional insight, for your intuition, but that wasn't intuition. It was hypervigilance. It was survival disguised as sensitivity. You weren't reading minds, you were reading danger. And over time you stopped asking questions. Because every time you did, the answers came with consequences. You learned to contain, to control, to swallow whole everything you wanted to scream. The world mistook that silence for strength. But silence, born from fear, isn't noble, it's a cage. You learned to be useful instead of real. You became a comfort to others, while your own discomfort was buried. And the longer you buried it, the more it became a shadow. A quiet, cold presence whispering, you're not allowed to need. But here's what Jung knew, and what most never learn. The shadow doesn't vanish because you ignore it, it waits. It waits in the places where you laugh too quickly, where you say, I'm fine without thinking, where your boundaries collapse the moment someone else's voice rises. The shadow waits not to hurt you, but to be held, because inside that shadow is the child who wasn't allowed to cry, the teenager who learned it was safer to be perfect than to be human, the adult who still doesn't know how to ask for help without guilt. You want to know why you can help others so well? Because you've been every version of broken that they have. You've navigated pain with a flashlight and a whisper. You know the map because you drew it in the dark. But the path doesn't end with being the guide. There's another step, one most never take. Turning the flashlight toward yourself. You think it'll burn. You think it'll swallow you whole, but it won't. Because the truth is, your shadow is just the part of you that's still waiting to be welcomed home. You have forgiven so many. You have shown compassion to people who never earned it. Now it's your turn. Forgive yourself for surviving by disappearing. Forgive yourself for learning love as a transaction. Forgive yourself for thinking your wounds disqualified you from needing anything at all. Because the healer you became still needs healing. Not endlessly, but honestly. This isn't about staying broken, it's about finally acknowledging where you bent. So you can return to yourself without shame, without armor, without apology. They told you your cracks made you fragile, but they never told you that cracks are how light enters stone. For years, you tried to hold it together, the perfect posture, the careful tone, the readiness to serve. You convinced yourself that healing meant hiding the broken parts, that resilience meant never letting anyone see you bleed. But there's an ancient art in Japan called kintsugi, where broken pottery isn't discarded but repaired with gold. The fractures are not concealed, they're honored. The vessel becomes more valuable, not less, because of what it's endured. That's you. Your empathy didn't come from ease, it came from endurance. Your insight wasn't learned from peace, it was forged in the fire of seeing too much too soon and still choosing to stay soft. Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth. Not everyone experiences it, but those who do often carry a quiet power. They've turned sorrow into perspective. They've turned isolation into intuition. They've turned what hurt them into something that helps others. And here's the paradox. The very things you thought disqualified you, your oversensitivity, your exhaustion, your emotional complexity, those are the things that make you a healer. Not despite your wounds, because of them, but this is the part that most people never teach. You don't have to be bleeding to offer medicine. You don't have to stay cracked to be useful. You get to be whole, you get to rest, you get to stop making art from pain and start making it from joy. Richard Rohr said, if we do not transform our pain, we will transmit it. And for a long time, maybe that's what you did. You took on more than you needed to. You over-delivered, you overfelt. You became so good at making others feel safe that you forgot how to feel safe in your own skin. But now you know, transformation doesn't come from suppressing the pain. It comes from understanding it, facing it, and walking through it without turning yourself into collateral damage again. You are not the cracked pot that leaks. You are the one that watered the flowers along the path without anyone noticing. And now it's your turn to notice, not just what you survived, but what you became. You became the kind of person who makes others feel less alone. You became the safe place you never had. You became a soul that didn't close, even when it had every reason to. That's gold, and it's yours. You want to be seen. But when the eyes finally turn toward you, you look away. You crave connection, but when it gets too close, your chest tightens. You offer deep understanding to others, but the moment someone asks, "What about you?" your voice becomes a whisper, unheard. Even by yourself, it feels like you're split in two. On one side, there's the longing for intimacy, for love, for touch. On the other, there's the suffocating need for space, the overwhelming desire to retreat into solitude. You are the one who can read the room in seconds, but when you're lost in your own emotions, everything feels blurry and distant. You are the one who comforts others, but when it's your turn to be comforted, your words fail you. You need people, but only from a distance. You want to be seen, but only on your own terms. This is the paradox of being an intuitive introvert. You're not weak. You're not confused. You're whole, but not in the way the world understands it. Your contradictions are the foundation of your uniqueness, your depth. The conflict between the world needing you and you needing the world is not a flaw, it's the very essence of who you are. Jung understood this. He spoke of the tension of opposites, of the inner conflict that shapes us into who we are. In order to grow, we must integrate our contradictions, not eliminate them. We must stop seeing them as opposing forces and start viewing them as complementary pieces that make us whole. You are both the light and the shadow, the need for connection and the need for solitude, the healer and the one who needs healing, the person who understands everyone else's pain but struggles to acknowledge their own. And that's okay, because in this very tension, in this sacred contradiction lies the magic. You are not meant to resolve your contradictions. You are meant to live with them, embrace them, learn from them. Think of the yin-yang symbol. Two halves, dark and light, soft and hard, coexisting, complementing each other, never fully one without the other. You are that. You are both the calm and the storm. It's time to stop feeling the need to choose, to stop feeling like you have to pick one side of yourself to love while neglecting the other. You can be both, and that's what makes you powerful. So stop trying to force yourself into a box. Stop apologizing for needing what you need. Stop hiding the parts of you that seem to contradict each other, because in your contradictions, you are finally free to be exactly who you are meant to be. There's something almost magical about cycles, the way they don't just repeat, but deepen with each turn, the way we return not to the same place, but to a new version of it. For years, you carried the weight of others. You gave and gave until you thought there was nothing left for yourself. You healed, you mended, you cared. And in the process, you lost yourself until the healing became a cycle that never quite included you. But here's the truth you might have missed. You can't heal others without healing yourself first. You can't give what you don't have. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that you were worthy of the very care you offered to everyone else. Carl Jung spoke of the wounded healer, the idea that we can only heal others because we know what it means to suffer, to be broken. And the most powerful healing comes not from the knowledge we've gained, but from the depth of the experience we've lived through. But what happens when the healer hasn't healed themselves yet? What happens when the person who's been holding everyone else together hasn't been allowed to fall apart? You don't have to be perfect to help others. You don't have to be whole to be of service, but you do have to allow yourself to be human. So here's the invitation. Look at yourself as you would look at anyone you love, with compassion, with patience, with the understanding that your scars aren't signs of weakness. They're proof of your strength. You've carried more than anyone should have to, and now it's time for you to be carried, not by others, but by yourself. This is not about fixing yourself, it's about returning to yourself. The healer you became, now it's time to become the one who heals themselves. And when you do, you will no longer be a martyr. You will be a force of understanding, a force of light, a force of healing, no longer running on empty, but on a deep, sustained well of inner peace. You can walk through this world not as a caretaker, but as a whole human being. You are the healer and you are the healed. This is your return. This is your beginning. And now it's your turn to be the one who takes the first step.